"If you're still here tomorrow," my daughter said, "I'm calling the police." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry, just finished, like I was a chapter she was done reading. Before I tell you how I disappeared that night without a word, if stories like this speak to you, please take a second to subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, back to that moment. The moment I stopped being her mother and became a problem to be removed. There's no warning when your child stops seeing you as family and starts seeing you as an inconvenience. I was in the kitchen at the time, slicing carrots for Madison's lunch the next day, my back to Nicole as she stood in the hallway with that unnerving stillness. Her boyfriend Eric had just left, the two of them whispering about her upcoming client pitch and the importance of appearances. I wasn't trying to overhear, but our house had thin walls, and the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. I had lived in that house for 7 years, ever since my husband passed. Nicole invited me, said we'd help each other. She had a toddler and a shattered heart from her divorce, and I had a pension, a grieving heart, and no one left to cook for. It seemed perfect at first. I took care of Madison, ran the house, even contributed quietly to the bills. Nicole chased her career and slowly stitched herself back together. But over time, what was once partnership began to feel like imbalance. Eric's arrival sped that up. He smiled with his mouth, but his words were little daggers dressed as suggestions. "Maybe you should look into retirement communities," he'd say. Or, "Don't you ever want space of your own?" He made Nicole feel like being independent meant cutting cords, even the ones still giving her light. And so, standing there, with Madison's laughter still faint upstairs and the sharp scent of onion on my hands, I heard my daughter deliver her verdict. It wasn't a request. It was a final notice. I could have reminded her of all I'd done, paid for school trips, covered groceries, kissed foreheads through fevers, swallowed my grief so she wouldn't have to deal with it. But I didn't. I just nodded and turned back toward the hallway, the words still echoing in my chest like a slammed door. I didn't cry. I didn't fight. But I knew. I would not be there tomorrow. I didn't speak another word that night. There was nothing left to defend. After everything we'd been through, everything I'd held together behind the scenes, Nicole had made her decision, and I heard her loud and clear. I was no longer a mother or a helper. I was an inconvenience. I moved slowly down the hallway toward my room, my thoughts not racing, but eerily still, like they were lining up in single file to quietly exit one by one. My room was modest, tucked in the back of the house. It had a single window facing the neighbor's garden and a creaky old dresser that had once belonged to my own mother. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the walls, which held none of my pictures, none of my history. I had never wanted to impose. I never hung anything personal. My life was lived quietly in the margins of their lives, in laundry loads, bedtime stories, late-night tea, and baking muffins for school. I never asked for space. I carved it around them, and still, somehow, I had taken up too much. I looked at my hands, dry from years of dishes and disinfectants, and thought of the thousands of meals I had prepared, the scraped knees I had cleaned, the business calls I had tiptoed around, and the hours I had spent being useful. Always useful. But now I was too present, too familiar, too much. I didn't sleep. I waited until the house was completely silent, Nicole's bedroom door closed, Madison's soft breathing down the hall, even the fridge humming at a steady lull. I moved with the care of a thief, though nothing I took was stolen. Just a few items, a framed photo of my husband and me at the cabin, his arms around me and snow in our hair, a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon, ones I wrote him every month after he passed, but never mailed, because where would I send them? And Madison's crayon drawing of the two of us holding hands in the backyard under a too bright sun with the words, "Granny's my best friend," scrawled in the sky. I rolled up my prayer mat, slid a small notebook into the side pocket of my worn duffel, and zipped it slowly. I left everything else: clothes, books, my name in the lease. I paused at Madison's door. My hand rested on the knob, but I didn't turn it. If I went in, I'd crumble. I'd sit beside her, brush the curls from her cheek, and find 100 reasons to stay. Instead, I leaned close and whispered, "I love you, sunshine. I'm not gone. Just not here." Maybe it would float to her in a dream. Maybe she'd remember it one day when she needed to. Then I turned, walked down the stairs, and glanced once at the living room, where we'd once played board games, where she took her first steps. I walked past the entry table and set my house keys down gently. No note, no drama, no guilt trip. I didn't want her to remember a scene. I wanted her to remember the quiet, the space she asked for, finally granted. I stepped out into the chill of the early morning, the kind of stillness that only exists before the world starts moving. The stars above me were fading. The sky was turning that pale blue that belongs only to those who haven't slept. I pulled my coat tighter, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and walked away without looking back. And for the first time in years, I felt weightless. By the time the sun fully rose, I was already 2 towns away. I hadn't planned where I'd go. I only knew I couldn't stay. I rode the early bus alongside shift workers and nursing aides, each of us sitting quietly with our own untold reasons for being up before the rest of the world. No one asked questions. That was what I wanted most, anonymity. I didn't have a phone anymore. I had left it behind on purpose, knowing Nicole would track it, and not out of worry, but out of image. A mother vanishing isn't just a personal inconvenience when you're trying to build a perfect life. It becomes a question others might ask at brunch. The bus rumbled through farmland and sleepy neighborhoods until we pulled into a town I didn't recognize. It was smaller, quieter, the kind of place where people still nodded at each other on the sidewalk and shops closed at sundown. I stepped off the bus with no destination, no plan, just a small duffel and a growing sense of resolve. For the first time in a long while, my time belonged to no one but me. I found a coffee shop with a worn red awning and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a black coffee and a plain bagel. The woman behind the counter had salt and pepper hair and wore a sweater 2 sizes too big. She looked me in the eyes when she spoke, not through me. That meant something. I sat by the window watching the small-town morning unfold. A man sweeping his shop front, a teenager unlocking a bike, a woman leading a golden retriever who clearly knew every crack in the sidewalk. These people didn't know me, and I didn't know them. That, too, meant something. I asked the woman at the counter if she knew anywhere nearby that rented rooms. She pointed across the street to a florist's shop with a small wooden sign that read, "Upstairs room. Inquire inside." And just like that, I had a place to sleep. It was modest, a narrow bed, a small desk, a window that overlooked the back alley. But it was clean. It was quiet. It was mine. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't let myself feel lost. I made the bed with the same neat corners I learned as a girl. I placed my few belongings on the desk. Then I sat at the window with my coffee and watched the shadows shift. There was no sound of footsteps above or below me, no TV blaring news I didn't want to hear, no arguments muffled through walls. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think. Later that afternoon, I walked through town. I wasn't looking for anything, but the smell of old paper and wood glue pulled me through the door of a secondhand bookstore, tucked between a pharmacy and a barber shop. The bell above the door jingled softly. The man behind the counter looked up and smiled, his face wrinkled but warm. We talked for a moment. Nothing deep, just the way strangers do when the silence feels kind. I asked if he ever needed help. He said maybe a few hours a week, sorting new arrivals or keeping the shelves dusted. I offered to try. He said he'd let me know. I left without expectation, but also without regret. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind push against the window, I realized something terrifying. No one knew where I was. No one knew what I was doing. And strangely, no one had tried to find me. Nicole hadn't called the shop. She hadn't alerted the police, not that I knew of. Maybe she thought I was bluffing. Maybe she didn't care. Or maybe, and this was the most painful thought of all, she was relieved. I tried not to let it hollow me out, but it did. Just a little. Still, I slept. Not well, not deeply, but I slept. And in the quiet dark, with only the hum of the radiator for company, I whispered the same sentence I had whispered to Madison the night I left. I'm not gone. Just not here. And for the first time, I started to believe it myself. The following weeks moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm that suited me more than I ever expected. Mornings began with black coffee and the creak of wooden stairs. The florist downstairs, her name was Jeanette, watered the front display at 7 a.m. sharp and hummed old jazz tunes as she worked. I helped once, sweeping the leaves that dropped overnight and straightening a few signs. She thanked me like I'd done her a great favor, not like I was just keeping my hands busy. I hadn't realized how much I needed to feel useful without being expected. There's a difference. At Nicole's house, I was always helping, always fixing, always doing. But it was invisible, thankless, expected. Here, a simple gesture earned a smile. Here, I was seen. The bookstore called me back after 3 days. The owner, Warren, said I could work mornings if I liked. A few hours shelving returns, checking inventory, minding the register when he stepped out for lunch. It paid next to nothing, but I didn't care. It gave me something to wake up for. The store smelled of old paper and cedar, the windows dusty in a way that made the morning light look soft and golden. People wandered in not to buy, but to talk. I began to learn names. Margaret, who came in every Thursday for romance paperbacks. Calvin, a high school teacher who liked dusty encyclopedias. Maya, a college student who sat cross-legged by the poetry section and always left her coffee cup on the second shelf. No one asked where I came from. No one asked who I'd left behind. It was the first time in years I didn't have to explain myself. Or worse, apologize for existing. But while I tried to move forward, part of me still drifted backward. At night, I wondered if Madison missed me, if she asked where I was, if Nicole lied to her or simply avoided the subject. My granddaughter had a habit of slipping drawings under my door whenever I was sad. Stick figures of us at the park, or baking cookies, or watching stars. I thought about how quiet that hallway must be now, how empty my old room must feel. I imagined Nicole's face the morning she found me gone. Would she be surprised, angry, relieved? A tiny part of me hoped she panicked just a little, that she walked into the kitchen and felt the weight of silence, where my voice used to be. That she looked at the coffee pot and remembered I always made it first. That maybe, just maybe, she saw the hole I left behind and wondered if it could be filled by anyone else. But I also knew Nicole. Knew how proud she was. If she missed me, she'd never admit it. Not out loud, not to anyone, maybe not even to herself. That's what pride does. It builds walls so high even grief can't climb over. Still, the phone never rang. No one came knocking. I wasn't being searched for. Not truly. And that fact, that silence, hurt more than anything she ever said to my face. Nicole didn't notice I was gone until late the next morning. I imagine she came downstairs expecting the usual. The smell of toast already browning, coffee already brewed, Madison's lunchbox zipped and stacked by the door. Instead, she walked into silence. No kettle, no movement, no grandmother humming in the kitchen. At first, maybe she thought I was still asleep, something I hadn't done past 6 a.m. in all my years under her roof. But when she checked my room and found the bed made tight, the closet empty, and the house keys sitting neatly on the entry table, the reality must have sunk in like cold water. I was gone. Not stormed out, not sulking in some relative's guest room, just gone. At first, she said nothing. Not to Madison, not to Eric, not to anyone. I know her well enough to imagine her pride was louder than her fear. Maybe she figured I was trying to punish her, that I'd come crawling back after a few days of dramatic silence. But days passed, and I didn't return. Then the routine began to show its seams. It started small. The trash not being taken out, the laundry forgotten in the machine until it soured, Madison's reading log left unsigned. Nothing catastrophic, but noticeable. Nicole, who'd built her life on clean lines and curated perfection, was now living in a house with crumbs on the counter and dishes piling in the sink, and it was no one's fault but hers. Eric, of course, tried to be helpful. He offered to hire a cleaner, suggested takeout, gave her soothing looks, and said things like, "You've got this," before disappearing into his phone. But the cracks weren't just in the schedule. They were in the walls. Literal ones. The old faucet I'd been planning to replace finally gave out. The boiler made a sound like it was choking. The bills, which I had silently helped cover for years, started showing up with late fees. I had set up auto pay on the utility account from my own pension. And now, without me there to absorb the slack, Nicole began to feel the weight of her own choices. Madison, sweet girl, was the first to truly feel it. She missed me. She said it every night, sometimes directly, sometimes in the way she asked if Grandma went on vacation or did I make her mad. Nicole brushed her off at first, told her I needed a break. But kids aren't stupid. Madison knew something was off. She stopped leaving drawings on the fridge. She started wetting the bed again. And when Eric stepped in to discipline her, she locked herself in her room and screamed that he wasn't her real family. I could almost hear her tiny voice echoing through the hallways I once cleaned. Then Nicole did something I never expected. She filed a missing persons report, not out of love, I know that, but out of image. She must have realized that her carefully curated life now had a dangerous narrative forming under it. What kind of woman drives her mother out of the house without a trace? What kind of mother disappears without a goodbye? I became a problem again, only now it was a public one. The police came. They asked questions. They searched records. They called the few contacts I'd left behind, including my old neighbor, who told them I'd sold my home years ago. When they asked Nicole if we'd argued, she hesitated. When they asked if she had asked me to leave, she lied. "No, nothing like that," she said, probably twisting her hands in that nervous way she always did when confronted. But I wasn't there to speak, and so the silence around me grew louder. What the police report couldn't reflect, and what Nicole would never say out loud, was how quickly the house began to feel haunted. Not by ghosts, but by absence. My absence. The kind that wraps around a home slowly and tightly until even the air feels unfamiliar. It was in the little things. The bathroom mirror fogged longer than usual because no one wiped it down after a shower. The mail stacked on the entry table because no one sorted it daily, placing bills in a neat pile and tossing flyers. The recycling overflowed. The fridge grew bare. Dinners turned into last-minute orders. Greasy food Madison barely touched. Nicole's work performance, once sharp and spotless, began slipping. She missed a deadline, then another, a meeting she forgot to add to her calendar. One afternoon, she arrived at Madison's school 30 minutes late. The teacher had to wait with her in the office, arms crossed, lips tight. It was the kind of incident that might have once been absorbed by me without a word. I used to keep 2 calendars, mine and Nicole's, not because she asked, but because I cared. Because I knew the only way she could keep climbing was if someone steadied the ground beneath her feet. Now the ground was cracking. Eric, ever the problem solver, suggested Nicole consider therapy. "You've got a lot of childhood stuff tied up in this," he said, like peeling an onion with tongs. But therapy wouldn't bring back the groceries, the folded towels, the hot tea when Madison had a sore throat. It wouldn't erase the look on her daughter's face when she asked, again, if Grandma was ever coming back. One night, Madison refused to eat. She said it didn't taste like Grandma's food. Nicole snapped and told her, "Grandma left us, Maddie. Stop pretending she's coming back." The silence after that cut deeper than the words themselves. Nicole left the table, glass of wine in hand, and cried in the hallway. Not for me, maybe not even for Madison, but for the perfect version of herself she was starting to realize didn't exist anymore. She had built her image on control, achievement, curated smiles, and flawless parenting. But she never realized how much of that was scaffolding I had quietly held up. With me gone, the picture frame was still on the wall, but the nails had loosened, the corners had curled, and she was seeing, perhaps for the first time, what was really holding everything together. That weekend, Nicole finally opened the old safe I had in the guest room closet. She had the code. I gave it to her years ago in case of emergency. Maybe she thought she'd find a will or an address. What she found instead was a binder. One I had kept for years, full of receipts. Credit card payments I had made for her, school supply runs, utility bills, even the vet bill for the cat she insisted on adopting but never actually cared for. In the back was a letter, never sealed, that read only, "I didn't keep track to guilt you. I kept track to remind myself it mattered." She didn't cry. Not right away. But she sat on the floor of that room, the one I once called mine, and she stayed there long into the evening. Long after Madison had gone to bed. Long after the wine had run dry. She finally called the florist shop I had always mentioned in passing, asked if anyone had seen me. They hadn't. Then she called the old bookstore I used to visit in our neighborhood. The manager remembered me, but hadn't seen me in months. She was quiet, he said, always reading, always kind. Nicole didn't leave her number, just hung up and stared out the window. It had taken less than 4 weeks. 4 weeks for her life to slip out from under her. 4 weeks to realize the silence she demanded was not the kind that brought peace. I had expected to feel guilt, real, gnawing guilt, the kind that steals sleep and fills the lungs with heaviness. After all, I had vanished. No forwarding address, no goodbye, not even a note to the granddaughter who once called me her forever friend. But that guilt never came. Not in the way I thought. What arrived instead was something I hadn't known I was missing. Relief. A quiet, steady relief that sat with me like an old friend. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a to-do list already clawing at my brain. I wasn't planning my day around anyone else's meetings, moods, or meals. I could walk to the bakery and spend 30 minutes choosing a muffin. I could read a book cover to cover in the park without glancing at the time. I could decide not to speak all day, and no one would ask me why I was being quiet. There's something sacred about being forgotten when you choose to be. Something peaceful about it. I was no longer a fixture, no longer around. I was free. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was simply gone from the life that had taken me for granted, and alive in the one I was starting to build. At the bookshop, I began working longer hours, not because I needed the money, I had enough tucked away, but because I liked the way the shelves smelled in the late afternoon. I liked hearing the bell chime over the door and greeting familiar faces. Warren, the owner, was kind but quiet, and never asked questions about my past. He taught me how to track inventory in the back office and let me create a staff picks table near the window. I started leaving handwritten notes inside the pages of books I loved. Little things. This one made me cry on page 247. Or, if you're grieving, this might hold your hand. One day, a woman returned and asked if I had written the note inside her book. She smiled, said it felt like the story had chosen her. That small moment, that flicker of connection with a stranger, meant more to me than years of doing the invisible in my own home. I began attending a weekly community circle at the church down the road, where we shared meals and memories. I told people my name was Lena. I didn't say more. No one pried. No one asked what I was escaping. And in that simple grace, I began to heal. It was slow. There were nights when I missed Madison so deeply it hurt to breathe. Days when I wondered if Nicole even noticed I was gone. But those feelings didn't anchor me anymore. They passed like weather, and beneath them, something sturdier had taken root. A sense of self not wrapped in service, not defined by usefulness, just me, standing quietly in a life of my own making. It had been about 5 weeks since I left when I saw it. A flyer, taped to the glass door of the pharmacy next to the flower shop. It fluttered slightly in the breeze each time a customer opened the door. I noticed it because it wasn't there the day before. The image caught my eye first. My face printed in grayscale, slightly stretched, slightly outdated. A photo Nicole must have taken years ago on my 60th birthday, back when she still called me Mom with softness and not impatience. Above the photo, in big black capital letters, missing. My name was printed below, along with my age, height, weight, and the date I was last seen. There was a local sheriff's number listed at the bottom, along with a smaller note in Nicole's handwriting. If you've seen her or know where she is, please let us know. Her granddaughter misses her. That part nearly buckled my knees. I stood there on the sidewalk for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. A few townspeople passed me on their way in or out, barely noticing. No one looked twice at me, even while my own eyes were locked on the poster of my own face. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out to touch the edge of the flyer. It was damp from morning dew, wrinkled from sun, but still bold enough to send a ripple through the quiet peace I had been building for myself, brick by quiet brick. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid someone would come knocking. I didn't think Nicole would ever leave her comfort zone long enough to drive here herself, but because I felt something stirring in my chest that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks. Regret? Number longing. Not for my old life, not for my daughter, but for Madison. For the little girl who once made me a bracelet out of dried macaroni and whispered, "You're my favorite grown-up," before falling asleep on my lap. I imagined her waking up each day wondering why the person who read her bedtime stories simply vanished. I thought of her walking past my old bedroom and seeing it empty, then being told some vague lie about me taking time away. Maybe she was angry with me. Maybe she cried. Maybe she started blaming herself. Kids do that, even when adults swear they won't. That thought sat in my chest like a rock. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I called the number on the flyer, but not from my cell phone, which I had replaced under a new name. I used the landline in the back office of the bookshop with Warren's quiet blessing. When a soft-voiced woman answered, I introduced myself not with fear, but calm. I told her I wasn't missing. I said I had left by choice and that I was safe, in good health and not in need of rescue. She hesitated, then asked if I wanted to contact my family directly. I said no. But, I added quietly, please tell my granddaughter that I love her, that this isn't her fault, that she'll understand one day. The woman was quiet for a moment, then she promised she would. I thanked her and hung up. No one traced the call. No one came running. No sirens, no angry voicemails, no messages from Nicole. But 2 days later, someone did come. The bell above the flower shop jingled at a strange time. Not morning, not closing. And I heard Jeanette call softly up the stairs to my room. "Lena, you've got a visitor." My hands froze over my mug of tea. I walked downstairs slowly, heart tapping against my ribs like a bird in a cage. There, standing in the middle of the shop between fresh peonies and eucalyptus, was Nicole. She looked thinner than before. Her coat hung loose around her shoulders. She was holding a bouquet, peonies, my favorite, though she never used to remember. Her eyes looked different, too. Not sharp and judgmental, but worn, exhausted. She didn't rush to hug me. She didn't even cry. She simply said, "Hi, Mom." Her voice cracked on the last word. In her other hand, she held a folded piece of paper. I didn't reach for it. I didn't ask what it said. We stood there, the space between us heavy with everything left unsaid. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered if this was a beginning or just an echo of an ending that never truly closed. We sat in the little tea room next to the flower shop, the one with only 2 tables and a chipped porcelain teapot Jeanette insisted made the best steep. It was early afternoon, and the sun filtered in through the windows, casting soft shadows between us. Nicole looked so out of place there, in her designer coat and perfectly creased slacks, like someone trying to dress for control while everything underneath her was unraveling. I poured the tea myself. She didn't stop me. That alone told me something had shifted. For the first minute, we said nothing, just the sound of porcelain on wood, the distant rustling of flower stems being trimmed below, and our breathing. I could see she was holding herself together with the last threads of whatever pride she had left, but behind her eyes was something else. Not rage, not shame, but fear. She finally broke the silence. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," she said softly, eyes flickering down at the table. "Not like that." I looked at her for a long time before answering. "You told me to." My voice wasn't bitter, just honest. "You said if I was there the next day, you'd call the police." She swallowed hard, her hands tightening slightly around the napkin in her lap. "I didn't mean it. I was angry. I felt cornered, and Eric—" She stopped herself. "I thought you'd come back after a few days. I didn't think you'd vanish." I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle before speaking again. "Nicole, I was never trying to take over your life. I came because you asked. I stayed because you needed help, and I never asked for anything in return." She nodded, eyes glossy. "I know." Her voice cracked. I think I started resenting how much I needed you, and I didn't know how to say that without sounding ungrateful." That was the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard from her. I didn't push for more. I just let it sit between us, like steam rising from the cups. "What did you tell Madison?" I finally asked. Nicole's lip trembled slightly. "At first, that you were taking a break. Then when she asked too many questions, I told her we had a fight, that you needed space. She didn't believe me. She asked me if it was her fault." I felt that sentence like a knife under the ribs. "It wasn't," I said. "She needs to know that. None of this is her fault." Nicole nodded quickly, tears finally sliding down her cheek. "I know. I'm trying." We sat in silence again, the weight of years, words, expectations, and small invisible sacrifices pressing down on both of us. She reached into her bag and handed me a stack of folded papers. Drawings, dozens of them, crayon pictures, stickers, little notes, and shaky handwriting. "She kept making these," Nicole said, "for you, every night before bed. I didn't have the heart to throw them out." I took them in my hands like they were made of glass. My fingers trembled as I opened the first one, me and Madison, holding hands with the words, "I miss you, Grandma," in bright pink. Something in me cracked open, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I just looked out the window at the sky, a soft gray folding in around the sun, and wondered if this fragile, painful reunion was the beginning of a return, or just the closing chapter I needed to write before truly letting go. That night, after Nicole left, I stayed awake in my little room above the flower shop and laid all the drawings out across the bed. Madison had drawn the two of us in a dozen different ways. At the park, baking cookies, walking in the rain, reading books. Every version of me had a wide smile and silver hair that looked like a crown. In one, she'd drawn me as a superhero, cape and all. I traced my fingers over the paper, felt the waxy press of crayon, and allowed myself to cry. Not because I wanted to go back, but because I missed loving her in the everyday ways. The lunchbox notes, the gentle hair brushing before bed, the small songs hummed in a kitchen while she sat cross-legged on the counter. I missed being part of her story, not just in memory or drawing, but in presence. But loving someone and going back to the place that hurt you are not the same. And I had learned that leaving wasn't betrayal. It was survival. That space I had created for myself wasn't a punishment. It was a resurrection. Still, I couldn't ignore that Nicole came to find me. She crossed a line of pride I never thought she'd dare touch. And even though her apology wasn't perfect, it was real. That mattered. Maybe not enough to erase what happened, but maybe enough to make room for something new. The next morning I met her again at the same table. She was early this time, nervous. Her coffee sat untouched. I walked in, not with hesitation, but with clarity. I handed her a small envelope. "I wrote Madison a letter," I said. "You can read it first if you want." She shook her head. "Number, that's between you two." That surprised me. She was learning, it seemed. Growing. Or at least trying. I sat across from her, and for a few moments we talked about small things. The flower shop, the bookstore, the town. She asked if I was happy. I said yes. She asked if I was angry. I said not anymore. Then came the question I had known was coming. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice small, fragile. I looked at her, really looked. The woman who had once been my daughter, fierce, stubborn, terrified of failure, but was still there. But so was someone else now, someone softer, more human. "No," I said gently. "Not like before." She nodded slowly, didn't argue, didn't beg. "But," I continued, "you and Madison can visit. You can come here, stay for a weekend, no expectations, no caretaking, just visit." Nicole's lip trembled again, and this time she didn't hold the tears back. She nodded. We sat there, side by side, drinking tea as the world outside moved on. Strangers walking, traffic humming, flowers blowing in the wind. And in that moment, we weren't mother and daughter trying to fix the past. We were just two women, both changed, both bruised, and both, in our own quiet way, beginning again.